Hi, good morning. My name is Ruth Cusick. I'm a senior staff attorney in the statewide education rights project of Public Counsel. And since 2008, I've been practicing law in LA, starting first with representing students with serious mental health issues when they were inappropriately excluded in school, whether by law enforcement or whether by inappropriate suspensions and expulsions. And the focus of my work and career has been partnering with community organizers on this very issue, transforming school climate and confronting systemic racism in our schools. So very happy to be with you guys.
Yeah, hi everybody. So my name is Leung. I am the Deputy Director of Advocacy and Staff Attorney at the ACLU of Southern California. We do a lot of things, but education equity is one of our main focuses here in California. And so we have attorneys and policy advocates and organizers in our affiliates across the state working on legislation, litigation, and community organizing to kind of lift up student voices and to make sure that our students are not criminalized and that they have all the resources they need to succeed in school.
Hello everyone, my name is Vitaly. I'm a teacher with Los Angeles Unified School District. I've been in education for over 20 years, last 17 of which has been with LA Unified, and the last 10 of which I've taught in an alternative, self-contained continuation school classroom. So it's like a one-room schoolhouse, just me and a group of about 20 or so, 25 students at any given point. And these are students that have been kicked out or pushed out of most other schools. Sometimes they're coming out of juvenile probation, sometimes they have ankle monitors, they're under house arrest. And so this is kind of like their last chance, so to speak, to make it in terms of getting a high school diploma. It's a fully accredited program. We actually have the highest accreditation possible through LAUSD. And I'm really proud of my students. They're incredible.
Good morning. I'm Pedro Noguera. I'm on the faculty here in the School of Education. It's my second year here at UCLA. I've been working on this topic for many years. Started my career teaching continuation high school in the Bay Area. Teaching a course right now here at UCLA on disrupting the school-to-prison pipeline.
So I'm going to speak a little bit about my experience with the school district's random metal detector search policy. Like many of you, I had no idea that this policy existed when I started working for LA Unified. And it was not a mandate, so it was not a requirement to conduct these searches until about 6 or so years ago. About 6, 7 years ago, my principal, who had hired me to teach in this alternative continuation program, informed many of the teachers who taught in similar classrooms that we would have to start searching our students with metal detectors. Because I'm in a self-contained classroom, there are no administrators on site. I'm the only credentialed person. And so as the administrative designee, that responsibility was given to me. Like many other public school policies that kind of start and then kind of, you know, get mired in bureaucracy and never really gain traction and never really get put into effect, I ignored it. I thought it would go away. I thought it was a joke. I thought they were just complying with some, you know, bureaucratic responsibility that they had, but they weren't really serious. It turns out they were serious. And over the course of the next few years, they started placing more demands on us. And I never checked out a metal detector. I never checked out a wand. I made up my mind right then and there that this policy didn't apply to me and my students. And I was hoping that it didn't apply to anybody. But being a public school teacher, I've learned to pick my battles. And I've tried to create a bubble for my students and I. So I try to protect them and insulate them from whatever policies that I don't think are really appropriate or healthy for my students. So a couple years go by, and nobody talks to me about it. And then all of a sudden, my principal who had hired me, who as it turns out, was looking the other way as I was ignoring the policy. She retired. And then we had a string of administrators, interim administrators, come in, and then finally got a new principal hired. During that time, the administrator who was responsible for collecting the logs that teachers and administrators are supposed to keep of who's searched started calling me and asking me for my logs. And my response was, well, I'm not doing this. I was upfront with them. I don't think this is a good idea. I don't think we need this. There's never been a violent incident in my classroom. My students have never brought a weapon to school. I have the safest, home-like environment for my students. My students, if you walk into my classroom, there's couches, there's comfortable chairs. My students have put all this amazing artwork on the wall. For them, it's like a second home. In fact, my classroom is located within a Section 8 housing community, and most of my students live there. This is their home. They can come to school in their pajamas, for all I care, as long as they are coming to school and learning and bettering their lives, right? So I explained this to the administrator, and the administrator says, well, I need your search logs. So I say, look, I can't do this. First of all, I don't even have a metal detector. I'm not going to check one out. And second of all, I couldn't even pick one up, let alone wand one of my students. Would you wand one of your children at home? Because that's what it would feel like to me to wand one of my children in my classroom. It's just unconscionable. It's dehumanizing. It's degrading. I wouldn't do it. I would lose all the respect that I've ever built with my students if I started doing that. Needless to say, my arguments didn't work, and that administrator began disciplinary proceedings against me. Ultimately, I was threatened with dismissal. They threatened to fire me for refusing to search my students with a metal detector. At that point, I got the union involved. I contacted ACLU, Public Counsel, Youth Justice Coalition, a whole bunch of other community organizations. My union filed a grievance, at which point my administration backed off and said, okay, you don't have to search your students, but because you refused, we're going to search them for you. So then the administrators came to my classroom, 2 of them, and selected students. The first one of whom they selected happened to be the only black male student in my classroom. He felt like he was being targeted. The administration did not have a clear plan for searching students before they came in. They came in, they looked around, they looked at the roster, and then they started selecting students. Is that random? I don't think so. So at that point, my students decided they weren't going to wait for another search. We met with our attorneys from the ACLU, from Public Counsel, from National Lawyers Guild, from the Labor Community Strategy Center, and we decided we were going to file a school climate complaint against our administration under the School Climate Bill of Rights, which I think Ruth or Victor are going to talk a little bit more about. Once we did that, we were never searched again. But the policy wasn't changed. It got us a meeting with the district general counsel, and I think Victor is going to talk a little bit more about that. But to this day, this policy requires daily random wandings in every middle school and high school in the district, and even charter schools that are co-located with LAUSD campuses. So every single day, young people are pulled out of class during instructional time and subjected to these degrading searches. And we've done some research, my students and I. We found that according to the Department of Education and Department of Justice, young people of color, black and brown youth, are 12 times more likely to be searched using this specific policy. And low-income students are 13 times more likely to be searched using this specific policy. Is that random? We all have implicit bias. Administrators have implicit bias. I don't trust myself to be random. I'm going to treat my students given my own biases, right? We live in a system that is not fair. We live in a white supremacist system. We live in a patriarchal system. We live in a capitalist system. Those are all biases that we have all internalized. We are all going to act out those biases. And so it's no surprise that it's black and brown youth that are being criminalized in our own schools. And it's no surprise that they then think it's normal when they leave school, the safe place that it's supposed to be, step outside and they're being stopped by the police who are harassing them, criminalizing them, and sometimes murdering them.
Yeah, so again, my name is Victor. I work for the ACLU, and yeah, this policy's been around for about 20 years now in various different iterations. In the beginning, it wasn't mandatory, as Vitaly said, but after an incident in Gardena, the district council suggested to the board and to the superintendent that they make this mandatory at every single school site, and that's essentially when we got involved. Vitaly contacted us to tell us about this policy. And we were really, really shocked both at the content of the policy itself and at the way the district was treating Vitaly and his students. So right in the beginning, when Vitaly refused to do the searches, we and Public Counsel and Youth Justice Coalition and the Labor Community Strategy Center stepped in and on his behalf sent a letter to his administration explaining all the different problems with the policy, why potentially it was illegal, and then trying to put as much pressure as we could, threatening them with all sorts of different things to get them to back off. Initially, they did back off that first time, but then they sent administrators in and really amplified the issue. When those administrators came in, it was a pretty traumatic experience for his students, and we really felt like that we could not stand by and let this happen both to Vitaly and his students and to really thousands of LAUSD youth every single day in this district. So we did we found what's called the School Climate Bill of Rights. The district passed the School Climate Bill of Rights a few years ago, which really was an indication or a suggestion by the district that they were going to remove these zero tolerance policies and move towards more positive and constructive ways to handle safety and student behavior. Promoting restorative justice, promoting positive behavior intervention and supports. And in this package of policies and resolutions, they created a complaint process, where if you felt like something discriminatory or the punitive practices were happening, you can file this complaint with the district and they would be required to respond. We filed a very comprehensive complaint with the district explaining all the various problems with this policy, and that resulted in a meeting with the General Counsel's office and operations. So at this meeting, we were represented with UCLA, Public Counsel, ACLU, Street Poets, and Youth Justice Coalition, and then Vitaly and a number of his students. And what we were trying to impress upon the district was that this is a very misguided policy that is not effective in promoting safety. And so we had youth from Vitaly's classroom who experienced this traumatic event, and we had youth who had already been pushed out of school because of policies like this, share their stories directly to these LAUSD administrators in the Beaudry office in a very, very powerful way. We provided lots of research, like what Vitaly just mentioned, explaining how these policies are both discriminatory and ineffective. We showed the district their own logs to show how poorly it's been implemented, how in magnet programs and how in schools on the west side or with fewer proportions of lower income students, they essentially don't get searched at all or maybe once a month. And in South LA and East LA, Dorsey, Jefferson, and Fremont, and places like this, they're searched multiple classes per day, maybe 20 to 50 students every single day are being pulled out of class and losing instructional time. And then we talked about some of the legal issues, how there's a disparate impact here, which potentially could lead the district to be liable for a lawsuit. And we also explained how this was far too intrusive and how the law, even though it does allow for random searches, does not allow them to yank students out of class and to dump out their bags on a daily basis and really degrade and dehumanize them. And so we made a pretty strong showing, I think, but the district essentially just stonewalled us. They had blank faces. I think the student stories actually moved them a little bit, but they went back into their office and essentially changed the policy only to reduce the amount of times that they could search Vitaly's classroom, because I think they realized how big of a problem this one school was. But they let it stand at every single other district school. And so we considered options at that point. We really essentially resolved Vitaly's situation, but we couldn't stand by and let this happen to thousands and thousands of middle and high school students across the district. And so over the past year or so, it's really been about 2 years since this initially happened, but in the past year we've been developing a campaign with our partners to put pressure on the district. We've met with most of the board members, and board members Zimmer, Rodriguez, and Garcia have expressed their concerns with the policy, and they've offered soft support, and really it's our job right now to get them to confirm and to introduce a resolution that's going to change this. But we have board members on the other side as well. So board members Schmerelson and McKenna have essentially endorsed the policy and refused to even meet with us to kind of discuss the merits. And then the other ones we're trying to, and there's an election right now, so we're trying to pin down all the different candidates to get their positions and make sure that they're on the right side of this. Before I talk just a little bit about the campaign, I do want to say 2 other really important things happened last year. Across the district, as I'm sure many of you work with, there's really progressive and wonderful educators, administrators, and teachers who would not want to do this and subject their students to these kinds of practices. Many in East and South LA schools are trying to implement restorative justice where they can as a way to promote safety. And really it's sad that when they started to do this, when they started to stop searching their students and implement these more constructive practices, the district cracked down on them. And the area superintendents came to their campuses and started requiring them, threatening discipline on administrators, saying, you cannot develop your relationships with students, you need to keep searching them on a daily basis during class time. And it's been really troubling, and unfortunately those school administrators who have been really, really wonderful and supportive of their students have backed down and are now searching their students under protest in a lot of schools across the district, which is, I think, is quite terrible. The other thing is charter schools, right, as Vitaly mentioned, co-located charter schools have to do this as well. And the charter schools on these co-locations, particularly the Green Dot Network, also expressed their displeasure with this policy. They said, we do not want to do this. We do not want to try to improve safety this way. We want to implement restorative justice and these better practices. And again, the district cracked down. Again, the district said, no, we're going to pull your charters. We're going to shut your schools down unless you pull students out on a daily basis. So again, those charter schools unfortunately backed down because their charters were at stake, and they started searching their students. So the district is really, really intransigent on this issue, and really it's going to take a lot of board advocacy and a lot of changing hearts and minds. So I'm just going to wrap up and pass it on to Ruth, but the last thing I want to say is, you know, as the ACLU Public Counsel, we file a lot of lawsuits. I have 2 lawsuits against the district right now for various things, and everyone always asks, why don't you just file a lawsuit to get this thing to end? The practice is illegal in certain ways. But like everything we do, we look at the various strategies to fix the problem and to get to the place we want to get to. And we really want to get to a place in this district where they no longer conduct any sort of searches at all. And the lawsuit's not going to do that. The lawsuit can, I mean, I think it's illegal how they're implementing it, and really it is too intrusive. But if we file a lawsuit and if we win, which I think we would, all they would do is either spread it out even farther along the district to search even more students in a more uniform way, or they would kind of change the bounds of it a little bit, maybe don't dump bags, maybe have a random process for selecting students, but still do it. And that's not the result that I think any of us at this table want to achieve. And so really what we're trying to do, and this is what Ruth's going to talk about, is try to change the conversation at the district about what safety means. And you know, the district has said so many things about the school conduct rights and restorative justice and all this, but they haven't committed to it. They haven't provided the investment necessary to make meaningful change in their school sites. So we're trying to use this to highlight kind of the absurdity and the contradictoriness of what they're doing, and trying to change the conversation both at the board and district level to make sure that there's meaningful change and that really no students can be subjected to this at all, and not just change it around the borders.
Time to work together and have a dialogue, and the one bit of context I wanted to add is that when Victor speaks about the School Climate Bill of Rights that passed in 2013, that was a result of a youth organizing campaign that really built on Cadre as an organization in South LA that brings Black and brown parents together to transform relationships of parents in schools, and they led the community in passing the district's first positive school discipline policy in 2007 to really use as a framework positive behavior support for the entire district. And then through all of the parents monitoring and seeing that it was basically a crapshoot. There were schools in Watson, South LA that were doing this, and it was about will and relationships, and schools a quarter mile down the way that weren't. And so with all of that knowledge, and then also with some really meaningful victories that the Labor Community Strategy Center led with us supporting them, is to shift decriminalizing attendance issues. So some of you probably know, or you may have experienced yourself if you grew up here, the kind of really hostile enforcement around tardies in especially certain communities, in these same communities that are being searched, you know, in South LA, in East LA and Boyle Heights. And so all of this has been this huge groundswell, and there has been a lot of change. And I think that's why we think we're at a specific moment, because as Victor talks about the limits of the law, what has been happening in LA is really a human rights vision for relationships in schools. And so as young people share very powerful stories about their own criminalization, and the attorneys or district administrators say, well, that's not the policy, and someone wasn't following the rule, we're like, no, there's a much more fundamental thing that needs to shift here. And so when we've been asked, all right, you know, we're willing to work with your coalition, but you need to give us an alternative, like give us the diet version of this racism. That's what's happening in the district. So we're excited to talk with you all today about the kind of evidence, the kind of positive, holistic, transformative examples like Vitaly's class, like other examples in the district that can really build the base for our elected officials to be brave enough to do what's right and to really support the policies they've already passed and that they're not implementing with fidelity. Another thing that could be exciting to work on together is, you know, like Vitaly shared, his students have already been pushed out of traditional schools. And a lot of times when we take youth leaders from Justice Coalition and Vitaly's schools, these students are, you know, between 16 and 24 years old, and it's very sad, but the district officials sometimes respond to them like, we've written you off, we failed you already, you know, it's over. But these searches happen 6th through 8th grade, when hopefully, I mean, we know still lots of young people of color, even little kids, don't get to be kids in our communities, but we're hoping, you know, that bringing together more families and younger students can maybe humanize this or have our district officials relate to it from a different level. And so we're excited with the momentum that's building. This is about implementing the School Climate Bill of Rights. And I think one last thing that can maybe help in the frame for our discussion, you know, is that we want very significant shifts around enforcement with LA School Police Department, and when they were ticketing and giving, you know, tens of thousands of tickets and multiple thousands of arrests now. Last year there were less than 700 tickets in the entire district. But even with that victory, we haven't really shifted the conversation of criminalization and the right for police to be there and the right for administrators to say, oh, you're supposed to be safe here, we want you to thrive, see your potential, and then 5 minutes later, you're treated like we assume the worst about you. So really look forward to having your thoughts and your great ideas to help get this done.
Professor Noguera was talking. Pedro Noguera was just saying, sorry, I can't help it. I'm deferential. It's just the school district in me. It's internalized. Anyway, this disparity of response, I think, is really important to address. And there was a study done by the U.S. Secret Service of over 30 high-profile school shootings, starting with Columbine. First of all the shootings, without exception, were done in mostly white, mostly middle-class or affluent communities. The second thing is Columbine already had metal detectors at the time of the shooting. The people who shot up that school went through the metal detectors. The metal detectors don't stop intentional violence from happening. And third, after they brought all the experts, and this is in every single one of these 30 high-profile cases that the U.S. Secret Service examined, after they brought in the school psychologists and the counselors and the therapists, they decided to remove the metal detectors from those schools. But at the same time, Policies were created all over the United States to criminalize young people of color in low-income neighborhoods. LAUSD is the product of other schools being shot up, not ours. The violence doesn't happen in our schools. Gardena was an isolated incident, and it was an accident. A gun went off in a backpack that was accidentally dropped. That student was bringing that gun to school not for the purpose of using it at school. It's because his neighborhood wasn't safe. And whose fault is that? Is it young people's fault that they live in dangerous neighborhoods, or is it the adults' fault? We are blaming our own children for what is our fault. Instead of fixing our neighborhoods, instead of creating safe passage programs, instead of having more gang intervention workers, we're putting more police and probation officers in schools. Schools that are already safe, that don't need them. The crime isn't happening at the school. It's happening around the school, in the neighborhood.
For their leadership and taking this on. And I want to point out, how many of you are prospective teachers, not yet teachers, but teachers in waiting? I wanted to really point out Vitaly's role in this, because he really did act in solidarity, which is the theme of the conference. And I want to point out that is, and I think we've heard already, it's risky, because he actually risked his job. And for that reason, many educators, teachers, and administrators often position themselves in opposition to their students. Because they accept the role. They accept the idea that their job is to police the students or to control the students, and as opposed to that teaching is an act of solidarity, and that you have to be an advocate for your students, which is what he demonstrated. We use the metaphor, school to prison pipeline. And it is a metaphor, but it's important to recognize that the criminalization of kids through excessive use of police for what were previously non-criminal offenses. I was at an elementary school in LA this week, and the police were brought in, 2 police officers, for horseplay between 2 4th graders. Now, I don't know if anybody got arrested, but why are the police even in the picture? So this readiness to call in the police, to treat what should be a simple discipline matter as a criminal matter is a tendency that we see throughout the country, but certainly in LA. And so I really want you to think about your role as a teacher. What does it mean to be a servant of this community that you're going to work in? And how do you really act in solidarity with those students as an advocate for those students? Because a lot of times their voices are not the ones being heard. I also want to, just to be fair, talk about the board's role in this and the district. Because let's keep in mind, this is a board that just adopted a very bold position around the undocumented. You know, they're saying they will defend the undocumented, they will fight off the INS, right? They passed the Student Bill of Rights, Climate Bill of Rights. They see themselves as good guys, right? They don't see themselves as participating in a school to prison pipeline. The other side, the other issue is they've been sued a lot. I mean, one of the huge issues facing this district is lawsuits. Now, a lot of it is because of sexual misconduct on the part of a small number of individuals, teachers, that's led to huge lawsuits. But they are scared shitless, is that okay? of another lawsuit, right? And so their fear is that if they don't implement the policy and a kid brings a weapon and someone gets shot, that they will be accountable, right? That they would be liable and sued again. So let's keep in mind, we are in Los Angeles. High school I work with in South LA, in the last 2 weeks, had a kid murdered, had a kid run over by a car, and had a girl raped. In the last 2 weeks. Just before that, those were incidents off campus, but they were right around the school. Just before that, one student beat up by 4 kids, and then many kids throughout the school said, we don't feel safe here. As we all know, when people don't feel safe, they will embrace security measures that take away their rights. We've seen that throughout America. We see that every day when we go through TSA, right, at the airport. Right? We are willing to give up our rights in the name of safety. So that's going on here too. And on the one hand, I think we can't be naive and think that there is no danger out there. On the other hand, we have to say what's reasonable, right? What are the ways in which to really create safe environments? And I think Vitaly speaks to that. By knowing your students, by creating an atmosphere that functions like a community where the focus is not on control, but on engaging kids and teaching and learning, that's ultimately what produces safety. And that's the message that we've got to take back to the board. So I want to just encourage the groups working on this to continue doing the research and to challenge the arbitrary nature of this policy. Because I know, and I've seen this over and over again, I was involved in a case in San Diego where there was an incident on campus between a security guard and some students, physical incident, and they had several students arrested. They wanted them to be expelled forever, right, from the district. And then that reporter was investigating how was discipline handled and was interviewing me. And I said, how many kids at La Jolla High School have ever been arrested for drugs? She said, well, it's funny you ask, because I've been looking into it. None in the last 10 years. And I said, do you think that's because they don't use drugs? Or do you think it's because it gets handled differently there? That's the part of it that we've got to draw to light, right? That is, some people are policed. Some people get the most punitive discipline for even minor infractions, while others are treated with, get second, third, multiple chances, right? And we see this so clearly now with the so-called opioid heroin crisis, which is mostly affecting white Americans, particularly in rural areas. So different in the way our society responds to that than it did to the crack cocaine epidemic in this country. And so drawing attention to these, the hypocrisy, the contradictions, I think is an important part of not just changing policy, but of educating the broader public about what's happening. I just watched the film last night, 13th. And if you haven't seen it, I strongly encourage you to watch it, because although it's very disturbing, it is such a pointed reminder of how we have allowed mass incarceration to just become a phenomenon in society and to accept it. You know, you see the film, Rick Nixon, 1970, 300, a little over 300,000 people in prison. By Trump, 2.3 million people already in prison, and the same rhetoric, tough on crime, lock them up. Right? It's that message which results in mass incarceration, and a version of that is playing out in our schools right now.